Okay, this is one of three mini talks on water quality. It's in Module 6, Introduction to Water Quality or Water Quality Basics. The main emphasis of this unit and frankly in this class are those major water quality parameters that are discussed in that chapter. Let me just pull that up real quick. Um, Yeah, in this water quality chapter, it's a very good chapter, and these are, the very basics of what constitute water quality. These parameters here are what really drive environmental water quality issues mostly, and are the main emphasis of the class. However, what you hear about in the news, and also what's important, are concentrations of individual constituents in the water that are potentially chronically or acutely toxic. We don't obviously like to have those in the water supply. And so, what this talk does is it just introduces the concept of a water quality standard and where it comes from, the different types of standards, and how they might be reported out to you. Um, this is a table that you can get this right off of the internet and the Water Board's regulatory site. And what I want to emphasize here is this MCL and the PHG. So the MCL, maybe you've heard of it before, it's called the maximum contaminant level. Maximum contaminant level. It is the level that the state regulates water quality. So the state, ultimately the federal government with the Safe Drinking Water Act, and as um, promulgates or sets these maximum contaminant levels, that is the level at which the water can't contain that particular chemical above the maximum contaminant level without the water provider facing some penalties and having to do a corrective action. And almost most important is reporting out to the people drinking the water what's there. Skip this DLR. I also want to tell you about the PHG, which is a public health goal. It's important to understand the difference of these things. And then, I'm sorry, the last one, the maximum contaminant level goal. These are three different things, and by knowing the difference of them, I think you understand each one quite a bit more. So, for each chemical that rises up as a chemical of concern, the federal government will, and certainly California, will do toxicity studies to try to understand what is a quote safe level of this particular constituent to have in the water supply. And that in California will result in the public health goal. So the public health goal is the result of the department, they call it OEHA, the Office of Environmental and Human Health Assessment, will do tox studies. I'm going to talk about the toxicology science later in a few minutes. But they just say, look, based on all the studies that are out there about what this chemical can do, this is the goal. Okay, let's look at aluminum. The public health goal is 0.6 parts per million. They publish that, and then that goal goes to the state water board. It goes out to the public, and out of that goal comes the maximum allowable contaminant level that is enforceable. Notice that the public health goal is usually lower than the maximum contaminant level. And not to scare people, but it's just, the health department here establishes this ideal level, and then it goes out to public and it goes out to water providers who say, listen, there's no way that we can provide water at that low concentration. In this case, we're looking at aluminum, which is naturally occurring. It's not like it's being deposited by polluters or something like that. It's out in the environment. It comes from natural earth materials, and it's just out there at concentrations that it's very, very difficult for water purveyors to provide water at the public health goal, and so they will establish the maximum contaminant level that's enforceable. So the public health goal and the maximum contaminant level goal is the ideal. The maximum contaminant level is what gets hashed out through the process of making legislation. So let's look at arsenic, another naturally occurring chemical. The MCL is 0.01 parts per million or 10 parts per billion. The goal is much lower than that. Again, that's just the toxicology folks getting together and using their science to say what would the ideal be. The maximum contaminant level goal, that's just what the federal guys come up with. They say zero. It's good to not have any arsenic. That's the goal, is zero. But we recognize that's not realistic. There's arsenic in the environment. And so it ends up being 10. So maximum contaminant level is the enforceable concentration that water providers are held to. The PHG is what Californian toxicologists say is the goal. And the maximum contaminant level goal is what the federal government says is the goal. So you can look these up online as to what's what the goal is and what the contaminant level is. That's just a little bit of terminology in a table. They've developed lots of these for organic and inorganic chemicals. The previous talk distinguished between organic and inorganic. Okay, one thing that came out of the Safe Drinking Water Act is a requirement that if you're a water provider, you need to present to your constituents, at least annually, a consumer confidence report. They call it a water quality report. This is the one for Sacramento. And in it, you'll find quite a bit of interesting information. They have the constituents, they give you the unit, they give you the public health goal or the maximum contaminant level goal. They give you the maximum contaminant level. They tell you what has been detected in their surface water and groundwater supplies, and they tell you where it comes from. So it's very informative little chart here. Believe me, they wouldn't be doing that if it weren't in the law, but it is in the law, and they do it. And there's a lot of information here. And some of this, the major sources you'll see echoed in the water quality chapter in terms of where some of these contaminants come from. This is just something to be aware of. A lot of folks get this in the mail and they just go, well, if this is not a bill, I'm not going to look at it. But you can pick this thing up and take a look at it, and hopefully after this class be interested in how much chlorine and trihalomethanes and organic chemicals are in the water at what concentrations. And again, I'm really just touching on things. This is an introductory course, but I want to touch on how we do the work, we being, the scientific community, do the work of establishing these public health goals and these maximum contaminant level goals. And it's all, using the science of toxicology. And then one principle of toxicology is this famous quote here: the dose makes the poison. So it's real important when you're talking about these chemicals to say, well, arsenic is poisonous, or aluminum is poisonous, and all that. Any chemical can be poisonous depending on the dose. And you can drink more water than your body needs and die that way. It's famous quote. So some chemicals are notoriously toxic at low concentrations. So those are, wow, arsenic is poisonous. And that means usually what people mean by that is that at low concentrations, it theoretically can cause a problem. So the science of toxicology is really what concentration, what dose is that dose that causes a risk to people's health that is not acceptable. So the basics are all chemicals are toxic. The toxicity depends on how potent the chemical is. Arsenic is more potent than nitrate, let's say, and then the amount that you get. And these charts here are really what I wanted to get at here, and that is the way these toxicology studies are done with chemicals is that you'll have what's called a dose response. And usually on the y-axis is the dose, and on the x-axis is the response. And so, I'm sorry, the other way around. Sorry, the x-axis is the dose, the y-axis is the response. So the more you dose somebody with something, the more the response will be. So let's say for a toxic chemical that causes cancer, the y-axis would be percentage of people that contracted cancer, and the x-axis would be the dose of the chemical. So the higher the dose, the higher the cancer incident rate. So you can imagine it's kind of difficult to do these studies, certainly on humans. And so, typically they're done on certain species of animals, usually lab rats. And we're also looking for a threshold response of something like 1 in 1,000,000. We'd like to have a carcinogenic chemical in the water at a concentration that would cause less than 1 in 1,000,000 people getting cancer from it. So how would you estimate that? Do you get 1,000,000 people and you expose them to a low dose and see if one of them gets cancer? There's no way. So what they do is they can only study these high doses and get a high response. So maybe they've got 100 rats and they get these high doses and get the responses way up here, and then they extrapolate back. And that is where there's different opinions and some controversy in the science. When they take huge doses with high responses that you can do economically in a lab, and then say, well, based on these different dose response relationships way up here, I mean, they're these poor rats, I mean, they're injecting them with arsenic at high concentration and getting a different dose response way up here and saying, well, based on that curve, we're going to project it all the way back down here to where we have a 1 in 1,000,000 chance. Maybe this is a 1 in 10 chance up here. Maybe you've got a couple of hundred rats and you're up here in the 1 in 10 level. You extrapolate all the way down here to the 1 in 1,000,000 level and come up with your estimated concentration that's safe. It's a little scary, the science, but what they do to handle uncertainty is they just lower the calculated dose. So if they run a model and they say, 100 part per billion arsenic should be okay, they say, yeah, but we only studied rats and we extrapolated. Let's divide that by 10 as a safety factor, and come up with, 1 or 10 part per billion. Again, toxicologists would say this is a little bit of a brutal overview, but it's a fair description of kind of how these numbers are developed. So there's some other good notes here, but again, so here we have, in a nutshell, the toxicologists in California doing those dose responses, studying. Sometimes there's epidemiological data available, sometimes, but otherwise they're looking at rat studies and developing the ideal, the goal. And then that gets churned through the legislative process to result in the actual enforceable level. Hope that's clear.